Welcome to Desperately Seeking the 80s. I am Meg.
And I am Jessica. And Meg and I have been friends since 1982. We got through middle school and high school together here in New York City, where we still live.
And where we podcast about New York City in the 80s. I do Ripped from the Headlines.
And I do pop culture.
So I heard from one of our lovely listeners about, I think it was last week's episode. Pretty sure. Yes, it's last week's episode. And this is what he has to say. His name is John, Jon. Loved your latest episode. And he said I could share this.
Okay.
Deborah Sheraton is a character. I know her.
Get out.
By reputation from the New York commercial real estate world. Her partner/husband, Steve Holm, was a mensch. He passed away a few years ago. I had the pleasure of working on a few deals with him. So that kind of softens Deborah, doesn't it? There was always some dispute as to whether Deborah was actually married to Steve. They held themselves out as husband and wife, but she was legally married to Durst at the same time.
Scandal.
His obituary says Deborah was his wife, but not legally. She still owns significant real estate, and I believe it was mostly purchased with money she got from Robert Durst. This is true. After the family essentially bought him out of their real estate business. You guys did a great job. Loved it. It softened Deborah. So I thought, I've been thinking about how Deborah found love in her life. Okay.
I don't know. The number of really lovely people I know who have been with total dicks, myself included, is, it's
okay.
It's a dynamic. So I hope that's the truth. I hope that she saw the light. The other thing that piece of information makes me think is, of course, they weren't married because she wanted whatever, having been the widow of or whatever of the Durst estate, there are all kinds of provisions. Like if you get married again, then you cannot XYZ. Who knows? So maybe it just wasn't in their financial best interest to.
Oh, absolutely not. To not be married to Robert Durst
or
was not
be the
in
widow
her.
Of. Exactly.
Was not in her financial best interest.
So I'm just saying that I love that there is a wonderful person involved in this story
where
of
there's
like
so few wonderful people.
They're a bag of snakes. So he just elevates the tone generally.
R.I.P. Steve. I don't have an engagement question for you, and this is because this is kind of a follow-up story to something that you already talked about. So I know that you're already, like it's in your brain and your mind and your heart because you're the one who inspired me to look more deeply into this story.
Little me?
Little you.
Oh, stop it. All right, well, I'm excited to hear what it is.
Okay, so I'm just going to jump on in.
Get in there, baby.
My sources are...
Me. No, I'm kidding.
Yes. Stop. And many articles from the New York Times, a Time magazine article, and a very young dancer.
Oh.
By Jill Krementz.
Nice.
And I have a copy right here.
I have been eyeing that book, wondering what it might be.
Oh, good. You didn't see what it was first?
No, I knew not to look.
On April 30th, 1983, George Balanchine, renowned choreographer and artistic director of the New York City Ballet, died at 79 of the rare Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
It was not diagnosed until after his death. His deterioration over the preceding few years was baffling and highly distressing, causing him to lose his balance and hear music and see colors differently. I mean, of all the people to get this disease, absolutely devastating for him as an artist. He came to America from St. Petersburg in 1933 and founded the New York City Ballet with Lincoln Kirstein. Do you know this person?
No.
City Ballet was energetic, passionate, and modern, which distinguished it from the classical American ballet theater. For Balanchine, it was all about the music and the movement rather than the story of the ballet or the celebrity of the dancers or the spectacle of the sets and costumes. His ballets were often stripped down to practice leotards and a bare stage and few musicians. Radical. He also had established, as you discussed in, I think it's our last episode. No, it's two episodes ago. He had also established a school to teach his method and feed into his company, the School for American Ballet, SAB. In 1975, the photographer, Jill Krementz, visited SAB and watched the auditions for Nutcracker, Balanchine's beloved ballet performed annually by the New York City Ballet. There are many roles for children in Nutcracker, all played by SAB students. 82 young dancers split between Cast A and Cast B are picked from the auditioners. Most of the 600 students would audition for Nutcracker. And there are lots of other ballets that require young dancers, but really Nutcracker was the biggie. Yeah. The coveted roles are the mice, the soldiers, the angels, the party-goers, and especially the young dancers under Mother Ginger's skirts who were picked from a higher, so mostly older division of dancers. I mean, they are really dancing. And, fun fact, Phyllis Goldman's daughter was one of the people who danced under Mother Ginger's skirts. Very exciting.
Love it.
If people haven't heard the other episode, Phyllis Goldman was my ballet teacher. Yeah. Anyway.
Phyllis Goldman in 5A. I will never
get
over
she lived
that.
on the 6th floor, but whatever.
Okay, fine.
The Sugar Plum Fairy was played by a principal ballerina from the New York City Ballet. In 1975, she was played by Patricia McBride. Dewdrop Fairy was played by Colleen Neary. The most coveted role for the children was Mary. The entire ballet is her fantasy. She needs to be a good dancer, whoever plays Mary, but mostly she needs to be a wonderful actor. She needs to run in fear and faint away and be in awe of all she sees in the land of sweets. The year that Jill Krementz watched auditions, a 10-year-old named Stephanie Shelby was cast by Balanchine himself as Mary. And Jill decided Stephanie would be the subject of her book, A Very Young Dancer. Jill photographed Stephanie as she ran from Sacred Heart to SAB and managed to squeeze in homework between rehearsals for Nutcracker. She interviewed Stephanie about what her days were like, and the book is narrated in Stephanie's voice. The book, as we discussed, was a huge cultural moment for most young girls in the late 70s into the 80s. Everyone wanted to be Stephanie. She was so special. She was so chosen.
I love how ominous that sounds like. By the cult? Yes.
You know what I mean, though, when I say that? She was the it girl for the preteens.
Yes, of course.
And the book didn't even tell the whole story. Stephanie.
Oh, no. Is there a dark story behind Stephanie? Oh, no. Okay.
Hold on. So, no, this is still, she's 10 years old. Stephanie lived in a 6-story double brownstone at 36 East 74th Street. That's a nice address.
Wait, the whole brownstone?
The whole double brownstone.
Shit. All right.
She lived with her father, the investment banker Fritz Selby, her brother, Christopher's sister, Andrea, who is discussed in the book, and her mother, Lynn, who also appears in the book. There's a garage with this double brownstone.
Isn't it amazing? Every story goes back to real estate.
It does.
It does.
Her mother, Lynn, was the daughter of painter Loretta Hines Howard, who was a student of the Ashcan School of Robert Henri. She also was a collector of crèche statuettes, many of which she donated to the Met in 1964. Each year, she and her descendants would spend the 3 weeks before Christmas arranging the 55 angels, 22 cherubs, and 69 nativity figures, Holy Family, Magi, shepherds, flocks, and townspeople on and around the museum's 20-foot spruce Christmas tree in the medieval sculpture hall.
So weird. Last weekend, I was at the Met with a new friend and talking about the Christmas tree specifically and how that's burned into New York kids' brains.
Mm-hmm.
So they were responsible for everything under the tree.
Yes, and on the tree.
And on the tree. And above the tree. Freaky.
Loretta Hines Howard, whose father was Edward Hines, a lumber baron from Chicago, began collecting the creche figures when she was in her 20s. While she lived and died in New York, her heart was still in the Midwest. Her family's other strongly held tradition was to spend every summer in Wyoming. On the first page of A Very Young Dancer, Stephanie says, quote, "I don't know if I want to be a dancer when I grow up, or if I want to do something with horses. I really like horses. I have a pony in Wyoming. My pony's name is Rosetta. My name is Stephanie."
Okay, that is why this kid was so popular. A little girl with a pony and ballet? I mean, that's kind of hitting it out of the park. That's like all of the little fantasies rolled into one.
So, Stephanie lived a fairy tale that any number of young girls fantasize about. And after the show, The Nutcracker, her director, David, said, quote, "He's going to put me in a pickle jar so I don't grow too much, and maybe I can do it again next Christmas."
Okay, creepy, gross, and horrible.
So the message is, don't grow. But also, if the young dancers didn't reach 5'3" by a certain age, they were asked to leave the school. It's so hard to hit that little, area called perfection.
Well, I think anything you read about ballet, particularly, and obviously my experiences, particularly in New York City schools, it's almost a reason not to get involved because it's so harrowing. And you and I sort of talked about that, two episodes ago, that like being at the school, maybe Phyllis was really nice to you, but I found the Harkness experience to be really kind of difficult.
I am so grateful that I took classes with Phyllis Goldman because even though she was an exacting teacher, it was a safe space.
Yeah, not a safe space at Harkness.
Jill Krementz's book ends with Stephanie back in class at SAB, but obviously that was not the end of the story.
Da, da, da.
The book, as we discussed, created a huge cultural moment. According to the Times, for a period of time, Stephanie was the most recognizable dancer in the world.
That's bizarre.
She appeared on Today, Midday Live with Bill Boggs, and a Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood Christmas special.
Oh,
She, like I said before, she was the it girl. But what the book didn't show was the brutal, critical, and cold side of the ballet world. As it turned out, Stephanie did not respond well to that environment. She would get headaches and need to miss class. A headache was not considered a legitimate excused absence. She didn't talk back to her strict Russian teachers. She rebelled in a different way. When she rose out of her plie, her middle finger would be pointedly extended out. 2 years after her star turn in Nutcracker, she was asked to withdraw from SAB. Now, she didn't really love ballet anymore. She hadn't for a while, but the rejection hit her hard, all the more so because of her fame. Stephanie and her mother came up with a cover story. She lied and said she quit ballet because she planned to go to college. Her father didn't know the truth for decades. And Stephanie did go to college. She went to Wesleyan, where she majored in religious studies, and she spent her summers with her horses in Wyoming. She worked as a mounted urban park ranger in the Bronx. How badass is that?
Wow. That's
But
pretty serious.
yeah, but one day she had a seizure in a park bathroom and thought to herself while she was lying on the floor of this bathroom, quote, "Life's not really working out too smoothly. I need to step outside of this picture."
What?
Yeah. So she found a monastery in Connecticut. Now, one thing I didn't mention was that her father traveled extensively to Tibet and Nepal, so she grew up familiar with meditation and Eastern religious practices. So that's not so bizarre that she was looking for a monastery. She actually thought about going to a monastery in Europe, but then she found out there was one in Connecticut, and her mother wanted to have her closer to home. At the monastery, she milked cows and learned Latin. She prayed and she meditated. Then she moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and she worked with the homeless. But really, like the 90s, she was at sea. She was battling depression. She was recognized every once in a while and peppered with questions. Why did you quit dancing? At one point, she took a pile of copies of A Very Young Dancer and dumped them at the Salvation Army. In 2007, she moved to Cody, Wyoming to oversee the building of a house for her mother. And there, she joined the evangelical church Streams of Life. And she met John, a guy from the Bronx, in her Bible study class who had never heard of A Very Young Dancer. They got married and they settled into Wyoming life. John worked as a cook, a builder, a taxidermist, and a plumber. Stephanie worked in a flower shop as a guide and a wrangler, and she volunteered at a Native American reservation. For a while, life away from the literal spotlight in New York City suited her very well, but she continued to battle depression. She divorced John. Her therapy dog, an Australian sheepdog named Pete, passed away in 2021. And then, on February 3rd, 2022, Stephanie died from complications of an apparent attempt to end her life, and she was 56. She did an interview with the Times in 2011 while she was settling into life in Wyoming, and when asked about her time on stage, she said, quote, "It was quite an experience. It is hard to top it. Out here kind of tops it in a way."
That is the saddest story I've ever heard. Well, up there. That's so incredibly sad. And it sort of raises the question, like, what does happen if you peak early? Or if you do well early, is that the peak? How do you keep that from being the end all be all for a kid?
Who knows? I mean, she could have been genetically predisposed to having mental health issues, but she did say in one of the articles that her childhood didn't help. What I thought was really interesting was just how obsessed young girls were with her. If we could have changed places with her, we would have in a heartbeat, based on what this book said about this very specific part of her life. And you just don't know what's going on. You don't know the big picture. And I also think in the 80s, I do think it's 80s specific. I mean, not that it doesn't exist now, not that we don't, look at Taylor Swift and go, oh my God, I wish I was Taylor Swift.
She's a grown
whatever.
woman.
What?
She's a grown woman.
Well, right. No, but you know what I mean. Not that I'm trying to talk about like it girls or like people who we idolize and go, oh, well, if only I had her life, things would be easier. And that's not just with celebrities. It's with people we know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was encouraged in a huge way in the 80s. I feel like there was a tendency to not ever talk about how things might be more complicated than she's the star of the show and she lives this lovely life in this beautiful home and this adoring family. I mean,
I think that we've talked about this in many different ways, but I think that one of the themes of many of our stories is winning. The 80s was about winning, and it was about excelling and it was about having the most. And children obviously are not, for the most part, earning money, and competing in the same arena as adults. But it's not like we weren't aware of it. It wasn't like that whole gestalt didn't wash over us. Like, of course we were aware. And it was a mindset that was so pervasive. I've never thought about it this way before, but hearing you talk about her difficulty and the obsession over her, that, yeah, I think that the idea of having a measured view of anybody was antithetical to that mindset. It was, she's winning and you're not.
Right.
And that's and the other, when you were just talking about her, the other person who that reminded me of the other 80s young dancer was the girl who played Roy Scheider's daughter in All That Jazz. And her name is like Ezra. I can't believe I remember this, but it's like Ezra Bet Foldy or something like that. She, to me, that was cool.
Oh, yeah.
Like she was the true, to me, that was the it girl.
And when she dances for him with his girlfriend Anne Ranking, it's like, okay, well, you can't get any cooler than that.
And talk about winning. She was the person who I envied. I agree with you. I agree with what you're saying. And it took a little moment to sort of remember how I projected myself into that young dancer headspace.
And not to cast aspersions on Jill Krementz, but the way that the book is written, it looks like she is following Stephanie and that Stephanie just happens to get cast in the lead role in Nutcracker. That's not actually what happened. She picked Stephanie because she was the lead role and then retroactively told her story. So I would hope that if this book was written in 2024, a version of this book was written in 2024, they would tell the story of someone who doesn't get the lead in the most coveted ballet that little girls want to be a part of. But in fact, like maybe it's somebody who gets disappointed and that's okay. But that is not very 80s.
I just looked it up. Her name is Ezra Bet Foldy. What is wrong with me that I retained that piece of information?
So you were right?
I was right.
Okay.
She's alive.
Great.
She's 58. And there is a woman named Sheila O'Malley who has a blog called the Sheila Variations. And she has an article all about how much she's our age, how much she loved Ezra Bet Foldy because of that film and how she was the only innocent thing in it and she could relate to her and how beautiful and perfect and worship worthy she was.
Worship worthy. If we're talking about stories that people choose to tell, that was the story that Jill Krementz chose to tell. She could have told a very different story.
What's difficult about the whole story, and I hear what you're saying, is that everything about it was manipulated.
That is not actually the problem that I have, and I don't necessarily know that I have a problem with it. I just feel like it was of a time, and what was being left out was actually kind of the most human part and the most important part. And that putting these particular icons up on a pedestal like that wasn't doing us any favors, and it wasn't doing them any favors, or it certainly didn't do Stephanie any favors.
You know what, Meg? That is so well said. And I agree with you entirely. And so my question to you is, do you feel like it brings all of the Jill Krementz books into question? Because they were all like, here's the achievement of this child.
I actually don't know that I read any of the other ones. I just read A Very Young Dancer one.
Yeah.
So, and it's not really about Jill so much. She was doing what everybody else was doing. And I'm just hope that we do it better now.
Well, the other thing that occurs to me is, now there's such an influx of information, right? There are a million different stories that can be accessed at a moment on an iPad or a phone or whatever. And when we were kids, this was the only story.
Right. But also that vulnerability is valued. I mean, if you think about like all the things in Life magazine in the 50s, I mean, all the puff pieces that our parents grew up with. I mean, we grew up with a version of that too. And I feel like now, I hope that when people say, I'm actually having some problems right now, I know it looks like a lot of fun, but I need a breather. I need to take a break because I'm really stressed out. That is something that we as an audience will hear and respect and revere them all the more for, because it's human and it reminds us of ourselves.
Entirely. I mean, and a friend of mine who is our age is a big Swiftie. And I was always kind of like, why?
Yeah.
Like, give me a break. What is this? And relatively recently, what I realized is it's that. It's what you just talked about. And whether or not the authenticity is really there or if it's partly manufactured, whatever. But the brand is, here's the mess of who I am, and here's the shiny part of who I am in equal measures. Starting her career with having endless songs about, here's the catalog of guys who fucked me over. And then, like re-recording all of her own music to get away from that douchebag Scooter Braun. She didn't hide anything. And so I think you're right. And about the vulnerability and authenticity and what people look for. And I think it is there in many, many different forms for people to access. Speaking of Stephanie Shelby and girls like her, as much as I rail against the internet, shaking my little analog fist at the digital world, at the same time, like I can think of so many things where I felt alone or I didn't even understand what was going on with me and having anxiety and depression and all of that stuff. If I had been able to look it up online, boy, that would have saved me a huge amount of confusion and years of sifting through, how do I place myself in the world? So I think the answer is sort of unavoidably, yes, like it's out there. It is better
I think so.
than here's this one example to live up to.
For her too.
Yeah. So my thesis for this presentation is there is nothing that fascinates New Yorkers so much as New Yorkers.
Okay.
And there are a whole bunch of things that I know we are both aware of and that we've spoken about on this podcast about the joys of overhearing other people in New York. And that, there's Metropolitan Diary, and there's Overheard in New York on Instagram. And Overheard in New York has been around for a while as well. But I found something old, but new to me, that is in this category of New Yorkers absolutely being obsessed with what the person at the next table is saying.
Okay.
So between the mid-70s and the early 90s, a cartoonist called Stan Mack.
Okay.
Never heard of him either.
All right, good. I'm trying to picture and I'm not picturing.
He did a cartoon strip in the Village Voice called Stan Mack's Real Life Funnies. The tagline was all dialogue guaranteed verbatim.
Love it.
And he had been, prior to being the Village Voice cartoonist or a Village Voice cartoonist, he did similar things. He did Stan Mack's Outtakes for Adweek. He did Mule's Diner for National Lampoon. Actually, Stan Mack's Outtakes for Adweek came in the middle of his stint at the Village Voice because they were inspired at Adweek by what he was doing. He was the art director for the New York Herald Tribune's Book Week. I didn't even know about the New York Herald. I mean, like I had heard of it, but I knew nothing about it. Fascinating New York paper that existed from 1924 to 1966. And it was like the number one morning paper, because people may not know this, but newspapers printed a morning edition and an evening edition because obviously no internet.
Things happen.
Right. So That's how Real Time was covered. So it was the number one morning paper, competing, I believe, exclusively with the New York Times. Then it was sold in early 60s, and the person who purchased it was equivalent of what would be a billionaire now. And he brought it back to life because it was on the wane, and it was killing it. And then in 1966, guess how this newspaper closed?
How?
There was a newspaper strike of 114 days. And typesetters and delivery guys and all of that, they closed the paper down, and it couldn't come back.
I bet that's not what they intended.
Pardon?
I'm sure that's not what they intended.
You never know. The New York, he was also the art director for the New York Times Book Review and the New York Times Sunday Magazine. So the minute that I realized this guy exists, I was like, I don't know what's up with him. And then I found out a book of his work has just been published.
Oh, fun.
By Fantagraphics. And Stan Mack is alive and well at 88.
Amazing.
Go Stan Mack.
Does he still live in New York?
I believe he does. What he would do from the mid-70s through the 90s was simply constantly walk around New York City and eavesdrop. What he created, he sees it as his personal history of that era. And he was really motivated by what people were saying and drew the cartoons so that there would be a context for people to want to read it. So I had never heard of a cartoonist going words first, but that's what he did. Although this spans almost 20-year period, his sweet spot was in the 80s. And some of the things that he talked about were very, very 80s specific. What he chose to do the cartoons about, it's so great that you can just hear it and the cartoon isn't absolutely necessary.
Love it.
The other interesting thing is that he pitched this as a one-off to the Village Voice, as like, here, I'll do like one feature. And Milton Glaser, father of the I Heart New York logo and campaign, said, no, this is a comic strip.
Okay. And when you say strip, is it 4 panels across or is it in a square?
It's 6 panels.
Okay.
Or more. Like, it really depends on what the text is. But it's in a classic, comic strip format of, 4 boxes or 3 boxes on top of same number.
Okay.
But I love that Milton Glaser was like, no. New Yorkers like to listen to themselves. Just for a little bit of context, I'm also going to show you how Metropolitan Diary, which is what I always think of as the ultimate in Overheard in New York, what they would cover and how different what Stan Mack was doing was. So Metropolitan Diary is people electing to send in what they hear. So they're amused by something they overhear, but there's always like a little personal agenda in what the average person, it's like sending a letter to the editor, right?
We were in Metropolitan Diary once because someone overheard Joe reading To Kill a Mockingbird to Alice on the bus going to school.
Oh my God, how cute.
I know.
That's so sweet. Did she say something heart-stoppingly adorable in response to him?
They just talked about how lovely it was to see a father reading that book to his daughter, to his young daughter in her cute little tunic uniform.
Well, funny enough, the one I've selected is about what happens on a bus. Because that's where everything interesting happens. Scary things happen on the subway. Interesting things happen on the bus. Okay, so Metropolitan Diary. This is from March 30th, 1983. Time for a bus vignette from Richard Weiner. It happened on the M30 bus on Broadway at 64th Street just as the doors were closing. Woman calling from the curb. This is the 5 bus, isn't it? Driver. No, it isn't. Woman. It isn't? Passengers shaking heads. No. No. Woman. But it looks like it.
So funny.
So that's like, isn't that the ultimate New Yorker? Like, but I'm doubling down. It looks like it is. Did I ever say on this podcast, just because I know that someone overheard me, and I know that they went home and talked about what the idiot in the movie theater said.
What did you say?
Have I ever told you this?
No.
Oh my God. So this is I'm bringing this up because of doubling down. And it is a very New York thing to do. Like, I will not be wrong, even though I'm wildly incorrect.
I've experienced this.
How dare you? How dare you? One of the things that I hate more than anything in the world as a short person is to get to a movie theater and carefully select my seat. And then the late people come in and say, can you move over? Because we want to sit next to each other.
No.
Right? Grounds for
you
massive
get
punishment.
here early.
Yeah. Thank you. So there I was in the movie theater with my second husband, and I'm quite sure that this precipitated my second divorce. I don't even know what movie we're seeing. It doesn't matter really. But there we are. And we're in the sort of balcony-ish at the theater on 13th Street and Broadway. And the lights go down, and predictably, and I see them coming. I see a couple enter, and I don't like them already because they're tall. And they're coming in, and I'm like, no, not today. Not today, motherfuckers. This is not going to happen. And I knew in my soul they were coming for me. And I watched them go across the orchestra, up the stairs. They even were on the other staircase. They crossed over. I'm like, no. And they clambered up to my row. I look up. They look at me. I'm convinced of this. And they say, could you move over so we can sit together? Now, in my row, there were a few like single seats, but like couples together. And then like, you know how people will have like a seat between. So it's like, I don't want to sit next to this fucking weirdo stranger. And ugh. So, okay. This woman asks this question, and something like, it was like
scared.
Yes, it was like in a cartoon, like, you know, when a spring goes like spring, like out of like some cartoon character's head. There, that's it. The spring flies out of my head. The clockwork goes awry. And I said, no, loudly, I am not moving. I got here on time.
My God.
And I chose this seat. And now at this point, my ex-husband is sliding out of his seat.
He's like, I'll trade seats.
Yeah, he's like, I'm out, whatever. He's like disintegrating into the floor, praying for a hole to open up and swallow him and deliver him from this fresh hell. Oh no, nay. That is not what's going to happen. And I am like looking, you know, the look, like big eyes, tight upper lip, fierce. And she looks at me and she goes, I wasn't talking to you. And
I love her.
No. Gets worse. Because I am now in a frenzy in my head. Like there are no rules anymore. There's nothing normal is happening in my head because I've gone rogue. I take a deep breath and I say, well, if you had been speaking to me, I still would not have moved. I couldn't. I doubled down. I absolutely freaked out. The good news is I have matured enormously since roughly 2006 when this happened. I think 18 years have mellowed me. Is that 18
Really?
years? Yeah, my God.
Mellowed? Okay. Good.
Have you seen me do anything? I'm going to start a fight with you now.
Oh, no.
Have you seen me do anything like That is just to illustrate my point that I believe firmly that New Yorkers like to double down because I've seen it. And in a moment of complete psychosis, I did it myself. I also want to just put out there that now that I am a more mature person, I'm also aware of the fact that that was like my mother being channeled through me.
Oh.
And I can now really own how I was raised. Because my mother took enormous joy in the story that she told herself that her lack of patronage made the local cheese shop close down. Anyway.
That's so funny.
So back to Stan Mack. He did two different kinds of cartoon strips. One was separate panels all strung together, but they were different people speaking.
Mhm.
So here's an example of that. Here's some overheard New York. I'm giving up my shrink. I'm getting crazier by the minute. Oh, I feel the same way. The next one, I have a very unusual spirit guide. He's a master cartoonist and uses the colors from my aura to make beautiful pictures. The next one, I shouldn't have had a child. What was I thinking?
No.
One thing you got to grant the Nazis, they understood leather.
Oh my God.
I can understand his position. If I were going out with me, I'd break it off too.
Oh my God.
I think that's my
I can
second husband is like,
relate
take a note.
to. Seriously, would I date me?
And then, no, I don't subscribe to the Village Voice. I'm too involved with myself. But what he also did was he shined through a light on a couple of things that were very topical and very 80s. And the two that I've chosen are baked goods, which will become apparent very quickly, and our favorite thing in the world, real estate.
Oh my God.
So
You
the
can't
first
get away
one
from it.
is, I need breasts for 20 people. I just came down from Binghamton. I need a birthday cake for a gay friend. He likes Miss Piggy. Which would be more erotic for an 18-year-old boy? How about breasts with a diploma between them? I need something subdued for my mother, something to give her a laugh, but not a heart attack. I'm looking for a male figure on a cake. Here's a cute one in our sample box. You can go for the base penis, but then add balls.
What is this bakery?
These candy cocksuckers are delicious. They're selling like hotcakes. I'm getting one licorice whip, 2 tiny tits, and a vagina. Wayne will love it. Okay, so that'll be mocha buttercream icing with chocolate breasts and marzipan overlay saying, wait, don't tell me. We'll have one female and one male butter cookie. The trouble is there are 2 different female cookies. I'll take the drippy one. That's the vagina. Well, I've never seen it before.
Yeah, this is very different from Metropolitan Diary.
Yes. Do you know where they were?
No,
Are you not aware of the erotic baker?
I guess not.
Well, the erotic baker was a sensation on Christopher Street in the 80s. They were the first ones, I guess, to get molds, baking molds, and they filled their windows with body parts.
Okay.
And naughty sayings on top of cakes and all kinds of madness. And they were considered the most risque thing in New York eateries. Poorly chosen word, but that's what it was. And they actually had an outpost in Columbus Circle. But considering that it wasn't Christopher Street, there was a curtain in front of them.
No.
And you had to ask to see it, and they would part the curtain for you. And one of the blogs that I found was from a woman our age who at the time, she would pass by it after Hebrew school with her friends, and they would try to get a look between the curtains.
Oh, that's so
and
cute.
every time they did, they would run away giggling until the rabbi caught them. And all he said was, anything good? And the girls never recovered and never went back.
That is such a great story.
So the erotic baker, I remember it really vividly. And that it was like, oh, how could they do such a thing? And I was scrolling through my Instagram feed before this, as I do. I always try to do like a little cross-reference before, just like, what's in the zeitgeist today? Yeah, not even a blink. This stuff would not even have caused someone to pause now, not would have. No, so tame. But I remember it was a scandal. So that's one, the erotic bakery. And the other one that he did in the 80s, there were squatters. We've talked about squatters in the East Village.
Yeah.
And so he did an entire dialogue between 2 people in the East Village with this housing issue. It's a very nice way to put it. I'd been wintering in Tompkins Square Park, sharing my refrigerator box with Looney Betty, an opera singer, till her agent lost all her money. 2 weeks ago, Della knocked on my box and said, "I'm spending the night." You know, women.
Oh,
I'd had my eye on him. I'd been homeless since October. I was evicted and they lost all my stuff. My kids said, "Mom, no shelters." The city said, "You're number 3,000. Come back later." My friend said, "Get certified nuts. It's better." I sent my kids to their father.
wow.
Last week, Marion invited me to this new squat. I asked about Tom. She said, "Bring him." One freezing night, he gave me his coat. Della found a couch on the street and told me to bring it along. Our first furniture, she said. You know, women. Usually I work construction, but today I'm here on sentry duty. We got to keep the wagons circled. Squats have lots of enemies. We're a family here. Marion, an ex-Moonie, and advertising person. Richard, a healer and witch. An anarchist couple who say it's time the bottom started kicking back. Ron, who left his family and job to be freer. And then there's Blossom. George and Ken are back in there. George is older and kind of depressed. Ken's young and drinks a little too much. They help each other. They used to live under the FDR Drive, and George can't seem to warm up. Tomorrow, we're taking George to the Bowery Mission for a bath, and we start removing the rubble from the building. I'm going to pick an apartment upstairs, bring my kids to see it, get some plants. We just got a hot plate. So for New Year's Eve, I'm cooking black-eyed peas, collard greens, and pig's feet for everyone. Tradition is important. And then me and Tom are going to have fun on our new couch. You know, women.
Ah, that's wild.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm a huge Stan Mack fan now. And now that I've given you what he works with, take a look at his cartooning, his work.
Yeah.
It's somewhere in the vicinity of R. Crumb, but not as demented and not as detailed, but you still have that gritty, these are real people that we're talking about kind of feeling.
Do you follow Humans of New York?
Yes.
We've talked about that a little bit. Yeah, I think his profiles are incredible, and what he gets people to talk about and how he sort of sculpts their stories, and with just an image. Is
well, to go back to what you brought up just moments ago in our first segment, your first segment, authenticity is everything. And when that started taking off, it made perfect sense to me because he did it so skillfully that you really came away feeling like you knew this person and you could find the common thread between you as the observer and them as the subject. It was really incredible. And I think that's why I was so drawn to Stan Mack, because he's not in it at all. He's a lens.
right.
And obviously, you know, yes, he's listening to what other people are saying, but he's choosing where to be and choosing what to use. Anyway, so I did not start off intending to plug anyone's new work, but check it out, find it, Fantagraphics, and he's amazing.
Definitely. What's our tie-in?
I know it might be a little abstract, but you know what you brought to the table with a very young dancer is you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. You don't know what someone's really thinking. And what Mac is doing or was doing was only showing what's going on behind the scenes. And back again to what you said earlier, what's going on behind the scenes is the real story and what people really care about and what holds up over time. That's what I got. Do you have any thoughts?
No, that's wonderful. I do want to, we haven't done an ask in a while.
A call to action.
A call to action. You know what I would really love to ask of people if they are so inclined?
Do tell.
I assume that if you are listening to this podcast, it means that you like what you hear And if you were to put that in writing in the form of a review and a number of stars, specifically 5, on Apple Podcasts, that would make such a huge difference. That's how Apple Podcasts works as far as like algorithm stuff, but also Spotify. And with Spotify, you just give us 5 stars and it records that and it helps other people discover us, which would be amazing.
I agree.
Please
Visibility.
do that.
Visibility,
Yay.
A+. Yes, that would be wonderful. And if you could take a moment out of your day, it feels very Channel 13, like, please take a moment out of your day. And if you do it enough times, we'll find you and send you some socks.
It's true.
It is true.
I just ordered more merch.
Oh, yay.